The Eastern Mediterranean flashes with brief, surgical bursts. Silent, perfect, unmistakably a strike. No flag, no claim, only confusion. In Washington, Tel Aviv, and Tehran, one question cuts through the dark: message or opening move? In this region, deterrence lives in hints and shadows. Tonight, one shadow was misread, and everything shifts. In the Middle East, nuclear deterrence doesn't sit on a single red line. It hangs on signals, ambiguous, deliberate, sometimes clumsy. And tonight, one signal has just been misread. Satellite feeds show a research compound in Syria hit by an unknown pair of standoff munitions. The pattern looks familiar: low collateral, high precision, launched from platforms unseen. Analysts in Washington assume Israel is sending a warning to Iran over accelerated enrichment activity. Analysts in Tehran assume the United States greenlit the strike to remind Iran that nuclear breakout won't be tolerated. Israel, meanwhile, assumes the US already knows who hit what and why. Each actor believes the others understand the intention. They don't. Inside Iran's National Security Council, the strike becomes proof that adversaries are preparing a campaign of deniable attacks. The memory of Osirak, Israel's 1981 destruction of Iraq's nuclear reactor, sits in the room, even unspoken. Preemption is their language. Silence is the message. Hardliners argue that failure to respond risks inviting a chain of attacks designed to cripple Iran's deterrent before it can mature. So Tehran reaches for a familiar tool: proxies. Within hours, missile cells in southern Lebanon shift position. Iraqi militias receive coded phrases buried inside routine logistical messages. In Yemen, a radar crew is quietly told to anticipate storms. None of these actions claim responsibility for the Syrian strike. They simply raise the temperature. They widen the battlefield. They push back without saying a word. In Tel Aviv, the pattern is obvious. To Israeli intelligence analysts, Hezbollah movements in the south look like preparations for a precision-guided rocket swarm, the same playbook seen in 2006, when misread intentions triggered a month-long war neither side originally wanted. The Israeli cabinet debates options: keep the response contained or preempt any proxy launch. The lesson of 2006 whispers from the walls. Hesitation can be read as weakness. Small cracks become open conflict. So, Israel authorizes a limited strike and deny operation. Unmanned aircraft slip across borders, heading suspected launch sites with airburst munitions meant to disable, not flatten. No official statement follows. The message is obvious to Jerusalem: stand down, we see everything. But in Tehran, it reads differently. They interpret the second wave of strikes as confirmation that the US-Israel axis is running coordinated attacks to paralyze Iranian influence networks. The absence of public attribution is taken as proof of escalation discipline, preparing the ground before a direct blow against Iranian nuclear facilities. Iranian commanders warned national leaders. This is how Osirak began. In Washington, meanwhile, the situation looks like spiraling miscommunication, but domestic politics won't allow visible passivity. The US decides to make its own signal: measured, unmistakable, but still below the nuclear threshold. 2 B-2s redeployed to Diego Garcia. A US destroyer turns back toward the Persian Gulf. Open-source analysts spot the movements within hours, broadcasting them across social media. None of these deployments are aggressive on their own, yet each hints at readiness. Each is meant to say, we're watching, we're not backing down. The problem: signals meant to reassure allies often alarm adversaries. Tehran interprets the B-2 move as preparation for a decapitation strike. Washington believes the signal is stabilizing. Israel assumes it's a warning shot to Iran. Hezbollah commanders read it as a cue to increase readiness. Everyone sees what they've been trained to see. That's how nuclear signaling breaks down, not with a launch, but with a misread whisper. As pressure builds, a rocket attack hits a US logistics logistics hub in western Iraq. The militia responsible claims the strike is retaliation for ongoing Zionist American aggression. The U.S. sees it as an Iranian-backed escalation. Iran insists to its inner circle that it didn't authorize that strike, but allowing a proxy to admit guilt without consequences risks losing credibility across its network. The logic of escalation tightens its grip. Now, Washington must decide: retaliate hard and risk a chain reaction, or hold back and appear indecisive. The Cuban Missile Crisis offers a sharp lesson here. Back in 1962, a single misinterpreted signal or unauthorized action could have triggered catastrophe. The U.S. president, mindful of those precedents, chooses a middle path: a cyber disruption campaign targeting militia communications. Quiet, precise, non-lethal. But cyber operations have a flaw: they leave no visible signal. Iran doesn't see restraint. It only sees increased interference. Next, an Iranian patrol boat fires near a U.S. drone over the Gulf. Warning shots, not a shoot-down. It's the kind of calibrated move designed to assert presence without crossing red lines. But video of the incident leaks online within minutes, recut by anonymous accounts into a dramatized attack, fueling nationalist outrage across multiple countries. Social media warps the signal. Leaders become trapped by their own audiences. Israel now fears that Iran is using the chaos to mask final steps toward a tactical nuclear capability. Intelligence estimates disagree on timelines, but the uncertainty itself becomes a threat. Senior Israeli officials recall the calculus of 1981. Waiting too long back then would have meant living next to Saddam Hussein's reactor. If we guess wrong now, one official mutters, we may not get a second chance. The Israeli Air Force quietly prepares plans for a long-range strike. Hard targets, multiple vectors, heavy escort. A plan that cannot be half-executed, the kind that will set the region on fire and force U.S. involvement, whether Washington wants it or not. Yet Israel's very preparation becomes a signal, and satellite imagery of fighter dispersal patterns reaches Iranian intelligence. Tehran now believes an Israeli first strike is imminent. Their own escalation ladder has a logical next rung: raise the readiness level of missile units capable of hitting Israeli bases and U.S. facilities. But raising readiness looks exactly like preparation to launch. In the White House Situation Room, U.S. analysts see missile crews moving at 3 separate bases. They need to know what the movement means: routine drills, political theater, or the early steps toward a launch. There's no clear answer. Instead, advisors debate elevating U.S. nuclear alert levels to reinforce deterrence. Some argue it's premature. Others warn that failing to respond signals weakness. The memory of the Cuban Missile Crisis again comes into play, when U.S. and Soviet signals often contradicted intentions, and every troop movement risked being misread as preparation for nuclear war. Back then, leaders negotiated directly to avoid catastrophe. Today, back channels exist, but mutual suspicion turns every message into a riddle. Tehran receives a private warning from a European intermediary. Washington is concerned. Restraint is advised. Iranian officials hear something entirely different. The U.S. is signaling that time is running out. In Israel, emergency briefing rooms hum with quiet urgency. Defense officials debate whether Iran's missile readiness is defensive or offensive. No answer satisfies everyone. One voice cuts through the room: if we wait for certainty, we'll get it only when missiles are already in the air. Meanwhile, on the ground, proxies act with a logic of their own. Lebanese militants fire a small salvo of unguided rockets toward Israel. Not enough to cause serious damage, but enough to ignite border skirmishes. Israel strikes the launch site. Hezbollah prepares a larger barrage in response. Both sides believe they're calibrating. Instead, they're stacking dry timber around the region's largest stockpile of strategic weapons. Washington, seeing the tinderbox, attempts a final, unmistakable signal: a visible strategic bomber flight across the region. Unarmed, highly public, purely deterrent. It's meant to say, stop, everybody stop. But signals land differently depending on the receiver. Iranian hardliners interpret the bomber flight as psychological preparation for imminent attacks on nuclear infrastructure. They urge leadership to authorize a demonstration launch, a missile test into open desert to show resolve. Others warn that any launch, even a test, could be mistaken for the real thing. That warning echoes the ghosts of the Cold War.
when test launches nearly triggered retaliatory responses because radar screens don't read intentions. Tehran decides against a launch. Instead, they elevate air defense readiness and scramble interceptors along the coastline. From space, that looks identical to preparations for a retaliatory strike. Tel Aviv sees those movements and concludes the window for preemption is closing. The cabinet greenlights a limited operation, hit pre-launch infrastructure inside Syria and Iraq to blunt proxy retaliation capability,
but avoid Iranian territory. It's a narrow path, one that counts on Tehran recognizing the restraint. The strikes hit just before dawn. Israeli jets fire standoff munitions at 3 sites. Damage is controlled, clean, intentional. Israeli officials believe they've bought breathing room. But inside Iran, the strikes cross a psychological line. They're interpreted as the start of a broader campaign. Phase 1 of the playbook used in the region for decades. Hit proxies first, then hit the homeland. Iran debates whether to activate long-range missiles. Military commanders urge a counterstrike on Israeli air bases to re-establish deterrence. Political leaders fear massive escalation. Intelligence officers warn that any counterstrike risks U.S. intervention, yet inaction risks emboldening adversaries. For hours, the region sits on a knife edge. Submarines reposition, air defenses buzz, satellites stream infrared signatures into command centers. Everyone scans for the move that will make the next decision for them. What finally slows the rush isn't a brilliant diplomatic breakthrough, it's exhaustion. Leaders staring into the abyss and blinking first. Back channels flare to life. Messages move between capitals, coded but clear enough. No one wants the next step. No nuclear thresholds should be tested tonight. And just like that, the escalation ladder freezes. Not resolved, not reversed, simply frozen, like a match held just above the fuse, waiting for a tremor. In the Middle East, nuclear signaling isn't loud. It's a dark room where every gesture can be mistaken for a strike. And this crisis, born from one ambiguous attack, ends with no clear victory, no clear lesson, just a question lingering over the region. How long can major powers rely on silent signals in a world where silence is the easiest thing to misread?